from WCI3 Plus. With your host, Kevin Lighty, this is Behind the Forecast.
Everybody, welcome in. I'm WCA3 Chief Meteorologist Kevin Lighty. It says so right there. Give me some likes and follows right here. You're back here again. You've made it. Hey, big episode here. Episode 30. 30 episodes of Behind the Forecast. Hope you guys have enjoyed what we put together here over the last, half year or so. Really appreciate all of you guys that keep coming back. And I love to be able to bring this show to you. So let's get to what we always do. And we start things out with our top 5 viral weather videos from the past week. And we start with, yeah, you guessed it, video number 5. Here we go. Boy, wildfires, a big thing as of late. Woodward, Oklahoma. And we're actually going to start and end the countdown with this, and I'll show you here in a bit as to why. So recently, big wildfires out there in areas that, don't always see this kind of stuff. I mean, this isn't California. This is Oklahoma, out near the Panhandle, and they had some fires out there. You can see, the brush trucks out there just trying to put out the fires. A lot of the farmers are out there with their equipment and discs and whatnot and trying to, make a break line there for the fire so it doesn't extend any further, but some scary situations out there in Oklahoma here in the past week with those fires. Video number 5. All right. Well, here's one way to kind of help out with the fire issues, and that's with some goats. That's right. Goats grazing. They're actually helping out. How about that? So basically, these goats out there, going out there, eating some of the vegetation and whatnot, and essentially just kind of helping out with things. And so that's what you're seeing there with those goats that are out there doing their thing. So how about it? Who doesn't love all the goats out there helping out, eating up all of that stuff that's normally going to burn? Well, this one, not so great. Our video number 3. Oh, boy. What is going on here? Well, we had a truck here that broke through the ice in Wisconsin. Not something you obviously typically want to do, but that's what the folks there had to deal with. There comes a point where you just can't get out on the lakes and whatnot like that, and that obviously happened out there. And so you can see that truck. Actually, it's kind of interesting. If you saw, the windshield wipers were still going. Yeah, there you go. Whew. Bad situation there, but nobody was injured. Okay, video number 2. Here we go. Look out. Watch the truck in front. Oh, he saved it. Didn't flip. Oh, overcorrect. Oh, off into the ditch. He didn't flip it, though. Stays upright and goes off there to the side. This was in Summit County, Colorado. So, a close call there for those individuals there in that truck. There it goes. And off into the ditch. I know a lot of us saying, I don't want any of that winter weather anymore. All right, this is a cool one here. We go back to Woodward, Oklahoma, where this guy's a storm tracker. He actually works for one of the local TV stations there, kind of like a freelance storm tracker there. And I guess he's like a volunteer firefighter on the side too. And so he was chasing, doing his thing for the TV station, but when duty calls, I guess he's got like a tank or something maybe there in the back, so he was able to help put out some of the fires there that were encroaching upon. Looks like that RV motorhome there, and so I don't know. I thought that was kind of cool. A lot of the storm chasers and whatnot. They often also aren't just out there to show you pictures of the storm. They can be first responders on scenes and help people. I just thought that was real kind of a cool thing there for him to get out there and do that in the midst of those fires going on out in Oklahoma. All right, guys, it is about time to get to the second part of the show. Dr. Trent Ford. We're talking fires. We're talking drought and the big drought issues that we've got here locally. We're going to talk to him more about what to expect with that as we go into the upcoming fire season and the drought season as well. So stay tuned. All right, welcome back to Behind the Forecast. I'm WCA3 Chief Meteorologist Kevin Lighty. Thanks for joining us here again, second half of the show, as we talk about the world of weather and meteorology, and in this case, some climatology. And with the Mr. Climatologist, that's right, the Illinois State Climatologist, Dr. Trent Ford is with us here once again. And thanks for joining us here, Doctor. Here's the thing, man. It's dry out there, and we're in a deficit here. We're in a pretty big one here. We wanted to kind of bring you in and talk a little bit more about kind of where things stand here in mid to late February, and kind of where things are going. So I know we've talked to you a little bit here in the last month about things, but kind of talk a little bit about where we sit right now in terms of Central Illinois and the drought that we're currently in.
Yeah, so this drought that we're currently in, really for East Central Illinois, Champaign, Piatt, DeWitt, Vermilion County, that kind of core East Central Illinois area, really started back last spring. We got a decent amount of rain in July to make some corn happy, and then the fall was just exceptionally dry. Just going back about 12 months, we have some pretty incredible departures, some pretty incredible deficits, really across much of East Central Illinois, anywhere between 15 and 18 inches below normal, between, February 18th, 2025 and February 18th, 2026. And, for perspective, we normally over that time period get maybe 35 to 40 inches of precipitation. So to be 15 inches below normal over a whole year is just really something. And so we came into this winter with really significant deficits, like I mentioned. Now, winter is not a wet time of the year. Actually, December, January, February are climatologically their driest months of the year. But we do tend to get some amount of precipitation, usually in Champaign, 7 to 8, maybe 9 inches of precipitation over that 3-month winter period. And we're around 2 right now, 2 to 3. So even by winter standards, our winter has been pretty dry. And so, typically when we can talk about, sort of the impacts of drought as far as soils and streams, things like that. But, normally when we have drought in fall, our soils become their driest, our water tables are their deepest, our streams are their lowest levels, right around October, November, and then they start to recover a little bit. And because of the dryness this winter, we just simply haven't seen that recovery. And so where we're going really depends on spring. Every week, every month that we go by where we're not getting an abundant amount of precipitation, and I don't mean that 1/4 of an inch that Champaign caught last week. That was fine, but it's not going to make a huge dent. I'm talking about weeks when we're getting 3/4, an inch and a half worth of rain. Every week that goes by that we're not getting that is a week we go either further in a drought or perpetuate that drought. So, and we have to make up for that. So what we're doing right now is putting a lot of the chips on spring to bring us out of that deficit before we get into summer. Because even if we have a wet summer, the higher temperatures really play a role in drying out that soil. So we really need a wet spring in order to get us to a point where especially from a water resource standpoint, we won't necessarily see a lot of accelerating water resource impacts.
So let's kind of talk about a little bit more of a historical perspective here. So we've got a pretty large area here, Champaign County, down to Douglas County, clipping Piatt County there, where we're in the extreme drought, okay?
Yeah.
There's another level that goes up to that, and that's the exceptional drought. And from a historical perspective, we've never hit that. Is that accurate here in Central Illinois? We've never actually hit that highest level since the drought monitor has kind of been out, which is the early 2000s,
Yeah.
right?
That's right. Yeah, 2000 is when the first drought monitor was put out. And since that time, Champaign County has not been, and just surrounding areas have not been in exceptional drought. We've had exceptional drought in Southern Illinois in 2012. Certainly if you think about like a year like 1988, before the drought monitor, this is all presumptive, but presumably part of this area probably would have been an exceptional drought because that was truly an exceptional drought in 1988 as well. But you're right that right now we have this area around East Central Illinois that's really centered over Champaign-Urbana. It's amazing how it's made it a little bit easier on monitoring drought for me because I can just look out the window of my house. But that central area is an extreme drought, which is D3 in the drought monitor. And we see severe drought, which is D2, extending all the way across to near Peoria, down to Springfield area, and then kind of around Shelbyville and around there. And then a lot of southern and south central western Illinois are in moderate drought, which is the first drought category D1. So it is a regional problem. It is a central to south central Illinois problem right now, but it is centered and most extreme in Champaign County and the surrounding areas.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about real world, real life impacts, and we'll separate this into two categories. Let's talk farming, agriculture, impacts there. If we continue down this path that we're on, and then let's talk about Bob and Mary at home, or maybe they're on a private well, or maybe let's talk about the two different impacts that we could see going into spring, into summer, if we don't start going on a different path.
Yeah, so start about agriculture first. And we have to break agriculture into its different forms that we see across central Illinois. So we have the most common type as far as land use is the commodity crops, the corn and the soybeans, and then to a lesser extent, wheat. In general, drier conditions going into spring can make, if we get the right temperatures, the right conditions, can make for a timely planting. So in some cases, some dryness can help with that. Now we need water to germinate, but getting the field work done is usually a little bit easier in drier soils. So that could actually, and we've seen this in past drought years, like a 2012, when because of warm conditions, because of dry conditions, planting was almost a breeze. The problem really comes is if that drought perpetuates into the summer and you're not getting enough water from rainfall in June, July, and August, especially around those critical reproductive stages of corn and the grain fill stages in corn and soybeans, it can really damage yields. No, I'll say that we can have summers, that June, July, August period, where we don't get very much rain at all, but there's an abundant amount of soil moisture that the crop can just pull from, and that's great. And even having a drier summer doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have drought impacts. The flip side can be true with agriculture. We could have very dry soils like what we have right now, and if we get enough rain in July and August, we're probably okay. That actually happened last year. Last year, 2025 was the second driest year on record in Champaign-Urbana, drier or wetter only than 1894. So nobody was around the last time it was this dry. And yet crops were variable, but doing okay because we got enough rain in July when it really, really mattered. The specialty crops, or the non-commodity crops, especially those that are perennial crops, the tree fruit, the berries, the vineyards, they of course are responding to drought throughout the year and not just during the growing season. So they can be a little bit more sensitive to drought conditions outside of the growing season. That being said, a lot of the vegetable and fruit production in Illinois is irrigated. So we can see a little bit of a little bit of mitigative action to take to respond to that drought condition. So overall, even if we have a dry spring, if we go into summer and we're exceptionally dry, but we get enough rain in the summertime, not saying that's necessarily going to happen, agricultural impacts may not be too bad. The one agricultural impact that I will say is likely going to respond to how dry it is and how dry it could be in the spring, if we do get that, is pasture. So for livestock and grazing, pasture is extremely sensitive. Even if we get an abundant amount of precipitation in June, July, August, because of the dryness pre-existing that, it's hard to make those multiple cuttings of really high quality hay and to get those pasture conditions. And so what we saw last year, especially in the fall, is livestock producers starting to feed hay for cattle and other grazing animals much earlier than they would typically in the wintertime, which of course eats into stocks, and it's a cost problem. So I would say that livestock production is a big piece of that. Go ahead. You're going to ask a question.
Just a kind of sidebar on the ag there. Would you say from a farmers that are going to be planting, is it more important for them to catch that rain in the next few months, or is it more important to have that rain in July and August? Like, if you had to weigh that, are they going to be waiting to plant based upon rain? I know you obviously need to be dry, but is it really dry? What kind of variabilities are going to be with farmers in their planting, and when is it the most important for them to actually get rain over the next, say, 6 months?
So not farming myself, but have working with many farmers and farm groups. So this is speaking based on those experiences,
Sure.
not based on farming myself. If you told me that I could have 2 inches of rain in April or 2 inches of rain in July and August, but not both, then most farmers, especially corn, soybeans, would choose the latter, the July-August period. Um, One thing that dry soils does, I mentioned how it makes for a timely spring planting process. If that seed is planted in dry soils and it germinates, that plant is going to be incentivized to push roots really far down into the soil to find whatever water is there. And what that means is that if we do get those periods of time of dryness in the summertime, now that plant is much more resilient to that drought because it's got those deep roots. Whereas when you plant in extremely wet soils, especially even just in the top layer, there's no incentive for the plant to put down roots because there's water abundant where it's at. It can put more energy into the stalk. So having those dry soils can also help to incentivize those deep rooting zones. So, however, that being said, the having that spring or excuse me, having that summer precipitation is so important for our commodity crop agriculture, especially. Then you asked about the water supply. That's actually something I'm much more concerned about for this particular drought because, when we start to see drought, we start to see the impacts first in agriculture and ecosystems and, lawns and things like that at residential areas. And then if it goes on long enough, we start to see water supply issues. And that's what we're starting to get into now. So back in November, City of Decatur put in their first set of voluntary water restrictions. Their reservoirs tend to be a bit undersized for their community, so they tend to be the first hit. And then we saw Bloomington do the same because of low levels in Lakes Evergreen and Bloomington. And then just recently, we heard Sullivan in Moultrie County, which is not on surface water, but like a lake, but is on groundwater supply, that their wells are not putting out the water that they need. And so they're actually declared a water emergency and put in much larger restrictions about car washing and things like that. So we're already seeing those water resource impacts. I've also, Jacob Dickey put out a big post on Facebook, a couple posts to say, hey, give me your impacts. And that was really helpful because we started to hear from a lot more people, dozens, about private rural wells that had been running dry as far west as Taylorville and that area, and even into Indiana as far east. So we're talking about pretty much the whole viewing area where people are seeing those impacts as well. The problem with that is that, of course, when you think about drinking water availability, it's always a problem when we have those restrictions, right? That's a major resource that we all can't live without. The other problem is that it's not just how fast drought comes on, but how quickly that rain that we will eventually get can replenish. And I talked about that agriculture, right? Like the corn can be stressed. If it gets the right rain, even just one inch, 1.5 inch rain, it's good. It's good to go. For water supply, it takes much longer period of time to recover. Lake Decatur, for example, catches a very large area of its what we call watershed upstream of the Sangamon, so it can refill fairly quickly. Whereas a groundwater system like what's in Sullivan's tends to respond much more slowly because that water has to rain on the ground, it has to get through all the stuff in the ground, and then finally penetrate that aquifer that they're tapping into. So what that means when we start to see these water resource impacts is that one wet month even is not going to necessarily end those problems. These are long-term issues. The other thing that I worry about is that if we get into spring and certainly into summer and continue this drought, we will very, very likely see these water resource impacts, municipal water, private well wells accelerate. And by accelerate, I mean spread. So right now we're seeing the most vulnerable water supplies be affected because they're the ones who are kind of the front line of being affected by drought. However, as we get into spring and summer, when humans are using more water, plants are using more water, it becomes a much bigger issue. So that's something that we're trying to get ahead of now to try to understand where folks are at what the extent of the problem is, where municipalities are at with their plans, making sure people are prepared in case this drought goes into summer. And then, of course, hoping that we do get an abundant amount of spring to at least improve stuff before we get into the summertime.
How do you feel we are actually prepared? Do you think we're ready for something like this if this goes down this path? Our residents, our cities, how comfortable are you with where we sit right now if we continue down this path? I'm just curious, kind of your thoughts.
Yeah, it's tough because every municipality, I mean, even just setting aside the rural private wells, every municipality has their own kind of their timelines and their water supplies. And I just use an example from the city of Pontiac, for example, up in Livingston County. They rely on river or water from the Vermilion River, but they also have a secondary source that's groundwater, so they can switch if needed. Now, it costs more likely, but it's something they can do. Whereas some municipalities maybe not have that auxiliary source of water that they can use. So it really just depends on the municipality. That being said, I think most local officials are aware of this problem, and just talking with municipal water managers, they're on top of it and they know the plan of action. I think so from that standpoint, the state, the Department of Natural Resources, EPA, they're sort of aware of this situation as well. We haven't seen, a drought task force being activated yet, and
what would it take for that to happen?
That's a good question. That's something that is at the governor's office decision, advised by different state agencies. I mean, since we are in winter, things do move a bit more slowly than when they get accelerated in the summertime. But that being said, we are at the Water Survey constantly briefing state agencies about what's going on, keeping in contact. They're well aware of it. We have good data sources, good information. So I think we're as ready as we can be. One thing that this year gives us more than the last really severe drought year, which was 2012. 2012 was a bit of a surprise. We knew it was dry coming in, but the forecasts were not bullish for drought in the spring and the summertime. And then we got an exceptionally dry and hot summer. This year, I think we're sort of ready in the terms of we know how bad things are right now. And if we get a 2012 like spring and summer, it's going to be quite bad as far as water supply and agriculture. And so what we want to do now, we have this time between February and let's call it June, where we can really spin up a lot of that coordination so that if, not saying that it has happened, but if we do see that kind of drought summer, that we'll be ready to go. From the scientists that like here at Water Survey, from the data that we're collecting, through the communication, through all of the policies and the programs that the state and different state agencies have, all of those things can be lined up. And hey, if we get a bunch of rain in April and May and we're good to go, great. Then I can go on vacation, right? The main thing is getting prepared. And the fact that this drought has drawn itself out so long gives us that opportunity to be ready and waiting. And that's one of the nice benefit about drought is it's not a tornado, right? We do have time to prepare. It's just that unlike a tornado, which ends after minutes to hours, we live with drought for a much longer period of time.
And we just got about a minute or so left here. Somebody's watching this. They've got some anxiety about this going in. What would you tell to somebody out there that's kind of, oh goodness, this sounds bad. What would you say to somebody out there watching right now?
Yeah, I mean, drought isn't fun. It can be mentally exhausting for sure. So taking breaks from listening about drought. But I will say that I mentioned from all of the scientists at Water Survey, the Prairie Research Institute, and other places collecting the data, communicating it, the states, the municipalities. I mean, the reason that Decatur and Bloomington and Sullivan are making these proclamations is because they're getting ahead of things. They're not waiting until their pumps run dry. They're telling you now, hey, we need to conserve now so we can have that water. So people who are paid to protect us from running into true water emergencies are doing their jobs and are on top of it. So what individuals need to do is watch for those types of calls of conservation And whether it's voluntary or mandatory, just heed them. So if your municipality says, hey, don't wash your car once a week, something like that, try not to do that, right? And those are the kind of things. But for folks who may be feeling anxious about drought, that's perfectly understandable. But like I mentioned, the folks who are working in this world from local to state level are on top of it. And are true professionals that can help us get through whatever the next few months have to offer.
Well, we've got full trust in all you guys out there, and appreciate you guys staying on top of it and communicating with us on what's going on. I have a feeling we may be continuing to talk to you in the months ahead here.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you raising the awareness on this, Kevin. And I mentioned Jacob's efforts to collect all that data. All that's super helpful. So it's great to partner with you guys.
Well, fantastic. Thank you again, Dr. Trent Ford. Once again, I'm sure we'll be talking to you again here soon.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. That's it, guys. That wraps up the show here. Thanks so much for joining us on another edition of Behind the Forecast. We'll see you again next time.